Hi, I'm David Farland. I'm a New York Times bestseller with over 60 novels in print. I've trained hundreds of best-selling authors, including such big names as Brandon Sanderson, James Dashner, Brandon Mull, and Stephanie Meyer. I'm also the lead judge for the world's largest science fiction and fantasy writing contest. Heating up as an author. Years ago, I heard a story that kind of stuck with me. Back in West Virginia, a good man stopped going to church. After a couple of years, a preacher stopped by the man's cabin in the mountains to invite him back, and the man argued that he no longer needed it. A fire was burning in his fireplace, and it had died down so that only hot coals shimmered in the fire. The priest took a pair of tongs and pulled out a coal from the fire and set it on the stone in front of the hearth. Within a few minutes, the coal began to cool and its fire died. The priest didn't need to say anything. He only raised an eyebrow, and the man got the lesson. Sometimes we can do more together than we can alone. I got to thinking about this about a year ago. I was talking to my son, who works as a counselor for writers, and he mentioned how very often when a writer changes one little habit, their entire writing system just seems to unravel. For example, he mentioned one writer who would play a game of solitaire for a few minutes before he wrote. Soon, that game began to consume whole hours and even whole days. The writer's schedule was unraveled by one bad habit, and my son simply had to tell him, quit playing solitaire. And that reminded me of an international bestseller who once told me, I lost 2 years of my life playing Civilization. You see, people often go through phases where they write wonderfully. Maybe they're doing something subconsciously, like reading good books, or writing in the morning when their biorhythms for writing are at their best, or they're writing in a genre that they love, and suddenly they change. Something, a little something, and the magic stops flowing. My son once said that in many cases he identifies that change and then tells the writer simply, go back to what works. The same, I have seen, may be true with writing groups. I've been in several of them, and recently I started the Apex group. I started it because I perceived a need for such a group where talented individuals could share their passion, their wisdom, and their triumphs. Years ago, I read a letter in which Ernest Hemingway had been trying to figure out a title for one of his novels. He had searched in vain for one and asked some of his friends for help. He went first to one writer, someone who later won a Nobel Prize, and asked for some advice that didn't work. So he asked another writer, who offered up the title, The Sun Also Rises, and that worked. Coincidentally, that author also won a Nobel Prize. So here were 3 writers in a writing group, exchanging advice, and all 3 winning Nobel Prizes. Similarly, I would have loved to have gone to Oxford 80 years ago and hobnobbed with the likes of C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien about writing fantasy. And the notion has often struck me that in today's world, we can communicate online. We can have people like Hemingways and Tolkiens in our writing groups. Yet writing groups often fail. They don't always fail due to bruised egos. I belonged to a nice one in college, but after college I moved away. And it became too inconvenient. A number of other good writers also moved away, and all of us, like simmering coals removed from the hearth, lost some of our fire. So I've been thinking about group dynamics. What is it that you want in a writing group? Here are a few thoughts. First off, let me explain that any one person might fulfill several roles. In other words, you might be able to fill 3 or 4 roles. Just as you can be a loving father, a tough soldier, and a devoted son to your mother, you can fill any of these roles listed below. In fact, to some degree, you have to fill all of them. If you're in a group with others who help support you, you may be stronger together than you are apart. The motivator. Some people are engines. They get groups started and keep them moving at a solid pace. These are the people who set goals for themselves and encourage others, then blow past goals without even thinking. The idea generator. Years ago, I asked some writing students to help come up with ideas for some short films. In a class of 20 students, I got several excellent ones. But soon I noticed that almost all of the great ideas were coming from one person, an author named Dan Wells, who has since become famous. He just has a gift for getting great story ideas, for seeing interesting situations that others don't. He recognizes ideas that are stale and finds those that are fresh and exciting. The storyteller. The storyteller is someone who envisions how to instantly transform a good idea into an original story. Not only does this person have deep insights into the human condition and understand character motivations, they understand the possibilities with stories. When a character is confronted with a problem, the storyteller sees a dozen ways that protagonist could try to resolve that problem. And of course, how those attempts could be hilarious, heartbreaking, or revelatory. The stylist. This person has a love for words on a micro level and an ear for poetic diction, for meter and internal rhyme. This is the kind of person who might be moved to tears by metaphors, or who quickly recognizes a sentence that is not right for a character's voice or a word that has the wrong connotations. I'm not sure why, but many great stylists seem to be terrible storytellers, and vice versa. The professor. The professor knows everything. He or she is like Norm in the television show Cheers. Want to know a little bit about Akkadian languages? Ask Norm. Want to know the 7 types of Chinese unicorns? Ask Norm. The accountant. The accountant is a person who recognizes opportunities to make money with writing, who is always searching for ways to publish in new formats or to win awards or to be first to publish in a new magazine. They may be great time managers too. You may see other interesting character types that you need in a writing group. For example, I think that every writing group needs a bailiff, someone to maintain order and, if necessary, throw out a person who is disruptive or not performing. Maybe every group needs a priest, too, to help settle disputes and heal fragile egos. The thing is, a group doesn't need to be large. You might be one of those rare writers who is a solitary genius, but more likely, you're going to find that others are great help. You might be an exceptional stylist, for example, and find that Lucy's input is still valuable. In other words, I suspect that nearly all of us would be better off in a small, manageable groups. It's easy for a good group to grow too large, so that writers are critiquing manuscripts instead of actually writing. In Apex, we have a large group of people from all over the world, but many of our writers are finding, for example, that they're doing well in smaller groups that meet for brainstorming sessions or writing sprints or to critique manuscripts. All of those are really worthwhile.